We are a sport that is involved in a lot of jumping and landing, including our tumbling and our stunting. And that high impact activity can create more pressure and stress on the knee joint. Welcome to the Cheer Athlete Podcast, where we bring coaches, parents, and athletes expert tips and advice to help keep cheerleaders healthy, strong, and at the top of their game. Now let's go. Welcome to the Cheer Athlete. Today, we're going to talk about knee injuries and how to prevent them, and more talking about overuse injuries compared to traumatic injuries. If you haven't, go back and listen to some of my prior episodes on injury prevention and other topics that we've talked about. I know we have a lot on ankles, which is one leading trigger for knee pain. So let's get on with this show today. Let's talk, first of all, why are cheerleaders prone to knee injuries? We are a sport that is involved in a lot of jumping and landing, including our tumbling and our stunting. And that high impact activity can create more pressure and stress on the knee joint. Those repetitive stresses can lead to increased training loads, especially when we're landing on hard surfaces like basketball courts or even a dead mat. Now, it doesn't mean that cheerleaders who are always practicing on spring floors aren't going to have some non-traumatic knee injuries as well, but it just creates more strain on the knee joint and the rest of the whole body when we land on those harder surface. We also have a lack of recovery time. We're not necessarily doing stretching after we do our workouts and cooling down. And are we always including proper strength and conditioning into our routines? Are we creating overload through our conditioning and creating more jumping and impact activities during season? I think this can, you can make a case either way, but that's why I recommend ramping up and tapering your training while you're in season, and then ramping it up in the off season, which, as I'm recording this, it's St. Patrick's Day. That's my green. And it's St. Patrick's Day of 2025, and we're coming into the off season for high school cheer. We have about 4 months left before in season goes, and now the time to ramp up. After we're going to kind of come down a little bit, take a break, do some easy conditioning, but then build up the strength and build up the plyometrics and build that load, so that when the season comes, we're not really pounding and jumping and creating that same impact, but we're still strength training. That's one way to look at preventing those overuse injuries in cheer, because all of that repetitive jumping, it just creates more impact. So let's first talk about some common non-traumatic knee injuries that we see in cheerleaders. One is Osgood-Schlatters disease. And this is when there's an inflammation around the tibial tuberosity of the knee, which is if you go just under your kneecap, there's a little bony prominence, a little stick out point. That's where the patella tendon, which is a tendon that attaches from your quadricep muscle, attaches to your tibia, which is the shin bone. And so that little tuberosity there gets inflamed, and it's quite painful. Sometimes you see it during growth spurts. It's really common in ages, like 10 to 15 years old. Kids can grow out of it, but this can be a dysfunction long term if we don't strengthen in and around it. Symptoms usually involve pain below the kneecap, swelling, tenderness, and sometimes a increased bump right over that region. Why do cheerleaders get it? They get repetitive jumping. There may be quad dominant. The quad muscles are the muscles on the front of the thighs. So if you're a little bit more quad dominant, it's going to create a little bit more irritation into that tendon that attaches the muscle to the bone. And we do a lot of repetitive jumping. A lot of, all our tumbling has impact, and a lot of squatting movements. How do we prevent this, or how do we reduce this? Look at activity modification. So if they're having pain and they're having a lot of pain below that kneecap, like limit the amount of craning that they do, limit the amount of jumping that they do. Maybe it's a matter of just doing a mock jump, or that they hit their timing, but they don't actually come off the ground and work on that landing. especially during in season. Now I know we need to run through, we need to go full out, but the number of times that the athlete has to go full out will directly affect what's happening at the knee. Strength training, most physical therapists will include a lot of strength training for the quads. I don't always think that that's the best idea. I think it's really important to strengthen your hamstrings and your glutes to help offload the impact that happens at the quads. Now we need strong quads. They extend our knees, they straighten our legs, they push us off the ground along with the glutes and the hamstrings. Nothing works in isolation. So we really can't avoid strengthening quads, but I don't always think that's the main exercise to include in that. A lot of times osgood ladder, as with you'll see it with the heel pain and Seaver's disease. I think it's a growth problem, and kids that lack the motor control to be able to crawl and unload and make the work through their hips and their pelvis and their core have a harder time, and they have more impact through their quads, and the quads tend to become more dominant, and then that creates that irritation. So I think it's really important to strengthen your glutes and your hamstrings and do things like crawling and rolling and really build the core strength up. One way you can do this in practice is or at home is to make sure that any exercise routine has a proper warm-up, and that you include some basic exercises to, cue your glutes that they need to work, or cue the hamstrings that they need to work. Look at form, making sure that we have good mobility, that we can isolate pelvic mobility, both tipping the pelvis forward and tucking the bottom under to create that pelvic tilt. And then starting to incorporate some, after you've finished your workouts, to incorporate some cool downs, like some stretching the quads, stretching your hamstrings, stretching your glutes, and making sure that we're getting those muscles to relax after we've used them a lot. Another common overuse injury is patellofemoral pain, and this is also maybe called runner's knee. And this happens when there's pain around the kneecap. They used to think that it was because of tracking of the patella, and that it kind of pulled a little bit more to the outside because that side band, that IT band, got really tight. It can be very common in flyers and jumpers, but of course any cheerleaders can have this. That repetitive strain with jumping and landing and deep squatting can affect how the knee moves. And it's common, like up and down stairs, they may complain of cracking and popping, the crunching noise. A lot of kids, they're like, oh, it sounds so gross. It's a major crunching noise. I don't worry any noises unless they're painful. And sometimes this can be painful because it creates that discomfort around, it's usually worse going up and down stairs, especially downstairs. The cheerleaders usually get it because they have weakness in their hips and their core, and maybe their knees tend to go more in as they land. So when you see someone land or jump and their knees kind of come together, or if they're setting up to load into either the flyers loading into the stunt, or the bases are setting for the stunt and their knees kind of drift in, that might indicate that they either need stronger outside hips, the abductors and the hip extensors, or the core also might need to get stronger. Generally, the IT band which is that muscle, that the band, it's a fascial band that goes along the side of the leg and attaches just below the knee at the top of the fibula, which is the outside bone of your leg. Or the quads tend to get tight. And so creating some mobility in there. Now, I'm of the mindset that if something is tight, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's tight and overworked. And it doesn't mean that we have to stretch it. The IT band, there are 3 muscles that attach there. Your glutes attached there, your piriformis attaches there, and your tensor fasciae latae, which is this like gnarly little muscle at the side of your hip, attaches into there. And all of them will affect the tightness of that band. Sometimes it can be overworked and needs to get loosened up, and rolling it can be helpful. And sometimes you need to actually strengthen those muscles to take the strain off of that and allow the kneecap to move better and to create that less strain through there. Training landing mechanics and avoiding overuse can be very helpful. So that making sure that we're landing, we have to teach how to land. We have to teach how to squat to be able to land so that the knees line up correctly. But don't overstress where the knees are, just making sure that they're landing soft, that they're landing quietly, that they're not landing stiff-legged and really hard. Really focus on in your workouts on glute and hip strengthening. That will help to stabilize that knee movement. Some side stepping can be helpful. I love Turkish get-ups to help work the hip rotators, making sure that you have full bend in your knee, and that you actually have the mobility in the knee, and that's where the ankles come in, because if you don't have good ankle range of motion, your knee may not always bend the way it needs to. These are things that we can look at in a movement screen, and we can find out easily in a movement screen. And then again, like we talked about, training those soft landings and trying to condition so that we land without that knee valgus. Another very common injury or overuse injury that we see in cheerleaders is a patella tendinopathy or jumper's knee. This is when there's the same thing kind of as the patellofemoral syndrome, that you have a strain and repetitive strain and inflammation around the patella tendon. Now in the knee, you have the quadricep muscles, which is the front of the leg. A tendon is what attaches the muscle to the bone. So the muscle is the quadriceps. You have a quadricep tendon above the knee, and you have a patella tendon below the knee. It's all kind of the same structure, but they are named differently, and they all attach into that bump, that tibial tuberosity just below the knee. So if you have inflammation around the patella tendon, which is just below the knee, it creates that you'll see some swelling there, some puffiness. Generally bases, back squats, and tumblers, because they're doing a lot of jumping and they're having to squat a lot. They may complain of that pain right below the kneecap, especially when they're jumping and landing. Why do cheerleaders get it? Because they are jumping a lot, because they're maybe don't have the strength through their glutes to really extend their hips and lift their legs. And also because maybe we're not necessarily getting the right recovery between practices, not taking enough time off, and letting things kind of calm down and heal. So when they get home, they don't need to be practicing their jumps all the time. If they're in season, take some time off. Don't be doing your jumps on your weekends. Let things rest, and take the time to help that recover. Doing eccentric training, things that you're lowering slowly, like step down exercises can help. That focuses a lot on quads, and sometimes that can be irritating in the beginning. So I like step ups, because if you lean into it a little bit more, you'll get a little bit more into the glute, and then you can put off. Lateral side steps, also lateral step ups, so stepping up the stairs sideways. You can step back a little farther. You don't get as much bend in the knee and as much load through the quad, but you get a little bit more into the outside of the hip. That'll help to take that strain off there as well. And things like hamstring curls that help to balance the quads and the hamstrings. Trying to balance your training load with recovery, doing enough training, but also having enough time off. And that varies. If they're coming out of practice and they're really they have really swollen up, I think that's the right language, then they might need a little bit more time off, and they might need some time to rest. There can be an argument made for proper footwear and supportive surfaces. I'm a firm believer in creating movement through your foot so that you don't restrict the movement. And cheerleading shoes are notorious for having really poor support. You'll see a running shoe that has a thick sole, and that's, to help control the foot movement. I don't like those myself. I don't know. Obviously, no base is going to want a flyer to wear a thick, chunky sole, because it hurts when you land on them. So we need to have that thinner base. We need to be able to grip it easier. I think that's better for your foot mechanics, but if you don't have solid foot mechanics, you need to build that strength there, and you need to make sure you have the right mobility, and you build the strength up. And that can really help to protect the knees as we're landing and jumping as well. So backtrack a little bit. The reason I'm talking about knee injuries today is when I was at state competition last weekend, I didn't see a lot of braces. There was a few bracing, like soft braces for knees. But the neoprene braces, they'll give you a little bit of support. Now your patellofemoral braces that will kind of help to get the patella to sit in the groove so that things track better. I saw a lot of taping a lot of kinesio tape around the knee to help that alignment. There's not a lot of research that shows that kinesio tape actually changes anything, but it does give good feedback into those muscles and the area that the tape is on, which may help to kind of quiet things down and take away some of that pain. If someone's in pain, it affects how they jump and how they land, how they perform in general. So quieting that pain down can be very helpful. And I think it's important, but we don't want to rely on that. And that's where all of these strength components come in, and why it's important to do strength work so that yes, you might need it for state competition. Let's not rely on it all the time, because then that just makes muscles and our structures weaker. And like, let's build things up so that we don't have to rely on bracing or tape to help. So you might have mentioned a common theme throughout the different injuries that we've talked about. Always going to look at strengthening the glutes and your hamstrings, potentially strengthening the quads if those seem to be overworked or underworked as well. Finding out what's restricted as far as mobility. Is it the ankle? Is it the hip? Creating better mobility through those joints so that the knee can actually move more freely. Working on improving landing mechanics to really cue them to land softly. Yeah, I like when the jumps come together and land. We make a noise with it, but like make the noise be your clap, or make it be the clean motion of when your hands come down, so that we're not landing hard on our feet. Trying to land always quietly will reduce the impact on them. And looking at, creating that mobility and soft tissue work between massage, foam rolling, stretching, working on that to just kind of quiet things down in between, not right before practice or event. We want to make sure that we are, doing more mobility and kind of creating motion as opposed to just stretching, but after practice, creating that better mobility to get things to calm down in things like the calves and the hips, especially making sure we can continue to get our foot to our butt to keep that full range of motion as well. Do some cross training, include more low impact workouts. So your strength workouts don't have to be hit all the time. They should not be hit all the time. Strength workouts should be low impact. We want to build those strength up and include things like squats, lunges, and deadlifts to help our knees and our hips. I hear all the time, like, I can't do squats, and I don't want to squat too low because that's going to put more strain on my knees. So actually squatting with your hips slightly below parallel, squatting with load below parallel can be iffy. And if you don't have that control, it's definitely not worth it. But we should have that mobility in our ankles and that strength in our core to be able to get our butt towards our feet when we get down into a squat for motion wise. For strength, you're going to want to work to at least parallel, maybe slightly below parallel. So I always recommend a box squat because that trains to make sure that we're getting through our hips and using our glutes, not just our quads. Even though it's going to be more of a knee exercise, squatting patterns are more of a knee exercise, we need to get that full depth, get that full range of motion to allow us to jump and strengthen our knees. And then lunges, they can be really uncomfortable. So starting from the ground up, starting with a split squat so that we set up in the right position and we're not driving everything through the knees, but we're working the whole leg instead. Deadlifts, usually, it's one of my go-to exercises for knee pain because you're not creating that bend that usually irritates that patella tendon, and it creates more strength for the glutes, the hamstrings, and because if you get into some single leg work, you create some lateral stability as well, all of which affects that iliotibial band, which runs down the side of your leg and allows the leg to move more naturally and helps to control that. Plus, that helps on your power and your landing mechanics as well. So single leg deadlift is probably one of the most important exercises a cheerleader can do, no matter what position you're in. Always encourage your athletes to listen to their body. Encourage your cheerleaders to talk to you if you're having minor discomfort beforehand, to go in and see your physical therapist and learn better mechanics and ways to manage that and get proper exercises to help before you get to the point where you're in so much pain that you can't do something. So just a quick recap. Overuse injuries are preventable with proper strength training and mechanics, and learning and allowing time for recovery as well. You know, the Oscar splatters, patellofemoral, and jumper's knee can all be corrected easily with proper strength training and mobility work. If you want to learn more information, I have lots of giveaways they'll be in the show notes. I have guide for flyers, landing mechanics. I have an injury prevention webinar that just came out a couple weeks ago, and injury prevention challenge that's up as evergreen now also. So you can find all those links in the show notes below. I encourage you, if you have a specific injury that you would like to talk about, please send me a message on social media. You can find that link below too. And just let me know, hey, I would like more information about this injury. I really think this is important. I want to make sure that I get what you want to hear about. So please send me a message, and I will absolutely work on providing some information about that. If this episode was helpful and informational for you and you found some value in it, please share it with your teammates. Encourage them to get help sooner than later, to find time for recovery, and to, really do the work to help prevent, so that you don't have to wear braces and taping all the time, and you're not dealing with pain all the time, because you don't have to live in pain. So I hope that was helpful for you. Knee injuries are definitely common, and I think we tend to ignore those injuries that are not traumatic. You see somebody that has an ACL injury, what happened. Not walking on it, they are out for a good long period of time. But these overuse injuries, they're preventable. You don't have to have pain. You can do the work. And when you put that work in, you learn the right exercises to help get things feeling better. And you have to keep them up. And then you learn how to have better landing mechanics. That pain can go away, and you'll be much happier. Your routines will be safer, and life will be good. I hope that was helpful for you. Let me know if you have any questions. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget, when in doubt, breathe it out. Take life one step at a time. You can do anything you put your mind to. And as my friend Joe Kelleher said, you're responsible for your own vibes. So go get the day.